So are we waiting for Councillor Michelle and Councillor Huffman still?
Oh.
I'm here, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and Mayor Chop is speaking. I have Councillor Columbus and Councillor Taylor on a list.
This is an important, I mean, it's an alternative. Again, I understand the importance of bylaw here, so I'm hoping that Councillor Huffman might return just to hear it out. So, you know, just to touch with Mr. Milson's comments, I think that, you know, all staff ultimately, like Jason said earlier, you know, are going to advocate fiercely for the department. I think the IT guys would probably say that, you know, they have been understaffed for a long time, and theirs is likely the, you know, the department then needs additional help in Norfolk County and so on. So I think, you know, that's up to us to, again, to weigh where's the 100,000 the best possible. If we're going to put 100,000 back in the budget and bylaw is the concern, where's the best possible use or to place that? Cannabis and downtown issues for Simcoe and Delhi are the serious problems. We saw greater results when we had somebody focused from bylaw entirely on cannabis issues. One option is to spend 100,000 on, you know, lobbying and trying to get the federal government to move on their regulations more than we can do by just sending in letters and so on, but actually have, like some municipalities do, proper lobbyists to go and do that. Another option, you know, we've had Councillor Taylor has been in the meetings. Councillor Rabbits, I know you always have work during the day, so it's been hard for you to go. I think you were at some. In terms of the multi-departmental meetings that were put together to tackle the downtown Simcoe issues, where we had representation from bylaw, from planning, from OPP, from health and social services. And I think that when we look at the cuts that we made to Ontario Works, one of the things with the Ontario Works dollars is we're also getting, it might not be a full 2-to-1 ratio, as in, you know, for every, you know, the government matching us on our contribution. But we are going to get some additional government dollars, provincial dollars, for every dollar that we put in. So Heidi, I think, is online, and one of the options I thought was looking at a targeted person specifically for downtown Simcoe and Delhi issues in terms of a social worker. And one of the things I remembered when I first was elected, Carrie Sinkowski, who came to make the presentation on the libraries, you know, I always remember her saying it would be really beneficial to have a social worker that actually was at the library. You know, that was one of the things that, so when people go in the library, they've got somebody in there that they can go and talk to without having to go out to Gab and so on. So I think Heidi is there, and maybe Councillor Van Passen, if we would be able to ask her before I carry on with sort of an alternative motion if this one should fail. But a presentation from Heidi on some options of what we could do to maybe better use that 100,000 in a bylaw manner, but maybe not with a bylaw officer, but with social work targeted specifically at our downtown core issues.
Well, I do have to ask the clerk, maybe, we do have a motion that is moved and seconded on the floor. So I don't really think we can allow sort of the discussion to go to a secondary motion until we either deal with the first one or defer the first one until after we have some more discussion. So I maybe look to the clerk for a little advice on, or if Heidi's comments would relate to the original motion about how a social worker could help with the bylaw. I think that would be in order.
Well, that's exactly it. It's further to this report. It's in a sense of downtown issues, which is one of the core issues that bylaw is dealing with, along with cannabis.
Okay, so Heidi, do you have some information that you can help with our discussion on bylaw?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to members of council, within our Ontario Works team, we do have a position that is called the Community Support Worker. We currently have 3 of them, and their focus is to provide intensive supports to our most vulnerable social assistance recipients. So those recipients who really struggle with some of the activities of daily living and being independent, issues related to physical and mental health, issues related to addiction, homelessness, general life stabilization, which with the transition of employment services to an external third party, the focus of Ontario Works in our area as one of the 9 prototype sites is more life stabilization work. And in the budget reduction option, it is noted that there is concern about there is concern about potential impacts of reductions in the intensity of life stabilization supports that we can provide. With additional funding to the Ontario Works budget, we can definitely do more community level outreach with our most vulnerable citizens, some of whom live in the downtown areas. And I'm certainly aware of some of the social issues with all of the social issues related to our downtowns. We've talked about them at our downtown task force, and I've been involved in problem solving individual issues with my colleagues in bylaw and building and fire when they have come up. But certainly with additional resources, I'm confident that we could take a more proactive approach, have staff who are more available out in the community, meeting with people, coming up with those individual service plans for individuals who are willing to work with us, and that is a challenge sometimes. But and I think that would have a positive impact on the situation in our downtowns.
Mayor Chop, you got any follow up to that?
Yeah, Heidi, so in terms of the funding, I mean, if we were to add that 100,000, back in, and reallocate it in this manner, would we even see, or if we put 70, like what are we likely to see some government, provincial and federal credit back on that as well?
So, Mr. Chair, through you to Mayor Chop, we do have a cap on our Ontario Works budget. We have had the opportunity last year to have some one-time funding that was specifically for the employment services transformation that we did not use, that has carried over. That's provincial funding in the amount of $25,000. And so we could try to access that or use that to help match. And we would look at the other area of our Ontario Works budget to see where we could maximize our provincial dollars for this effort. I think an additional municipal investment would also give us the opportunity to advocate to the province for additional funding in Ontario Works. Our Ontario Works funding has been frozen at our 2018 actual levels since 2018. So we've been operating without a funding increase since 2018.
And then one more question, Councillor Van Passen, if it's okay. I guess maybe question statement in terms of the letter that was sent to council by Haldeman's council that said that they were looking to, they were fine with removing the Ontario Works contribution this year, but they wanted to, and Heidi, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they wanted to see that back in again next year. So one of the concerns I have, so we add bylaw back in, we've made the significant cut Ontario Works, but we're looking at putting that back in next year. It's not really helping our long-term budget strategy of trying to narrow this gap here between, revenues coming in and our expenses. So again, it's just another reason that I think this would maybe, be a chance to use this as to see whether or not, with somebody targeted specifically at the downtown, because bylaw with some of these people, I think we can all agree, the answer is not just saying, you can't do that, or don't be here, or don't leave your shopping cart, but it's actually helping them, along the way. So for myself, again, like Jason said, if we have $100,000 we're going to put back in, biggest bylaw issues we have are downtown and cannabis. I'd like to see the 100,000 go specifically to downtown issues, and whether that's a bylaw officer in uniform or, you know, a social worker that's dedicated to downtown. I think the social worker dedicated, like we had somebody dedicated to the cannabis files, would be better serving for us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And after your score presentation to the minister yesterday, maybe we should just be asking for funding for 2 dedicated cannabis officers directly from the Attorney General. So, but I have Councillor Columbus, Councillor Taylor, and Councillor Martin. Is there anybody else that wants on the list? Or Councillor Columbus?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Van Passen. And I do not agree with the mayor's thinking on this. I don't think we should. We actually need the boots on the ground, and I think Mr. Milson does an excellent job of leading this division now, like a lot of other people are saying. We have to get back to the 3 things. I think we've got the cannabis issue, which is really serious. It was mentioned there's 80 of them. Well, I can tell you there's over 100 of them, and there's help needed there. The COVID issue. Look at last summer, we had bylaw officers with overtime. We can't take boots on the ground away from that. We're going to have this COVID thing upon us for another year, maybe 3 years, who knows? And it's always been said by bylaw that we're going to a proactive move with respect to bylaw enforcement. That means that if a bylaw officer drives by a messy yard, he can actually write that up without having a complaint to go by. And same with parking and everything else. So I support getting back to the main issue here that we've got to deal with. Keep the bylaw officers as to where they're at with the same number, and keep Mr. Milson in his job. He's doing a phenomenal job, and I know everybody's appreciating it. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, you've been waiting patiently.
Come on.
Yeah.
There you are. There you go.
Come on.
There.
All right. I actually quite like the idea of the downtown dedication. I'm thinking more on the lines of there's so many issues downtown that are more specific to property standards and things like that as well. I like the idea of giving the direction to keep a bylaw officer on with that direction to keep their specific calls to downtown Simcoe, downtown Delhi, downtown Waterford, downtown Dover. You know, they are a downtown specific urban center bylaw officer. More so than I understand the direction with the social worker, but given the vast, I guess given the number and variety of calls that come in for bylaw downtown, I think the idea of a specific bylaw officer for the downtowns would be more beneficial. I'm wondering if Jim Milson could make a comment perhaps on what kind of an impact you would expect if a bylaw officer was dedicated strictly towards the downtowns.
Yeah, thank you. Our calls for service are all over the county. Like, there are issues downtown that drive longer responses because of the there are challenged people in our community for housing and employment, and that drive a lot of other issues such as garbage and things like that we see that you know, perhaps some damage in that. So it's you know, we have police for that. We have 3 OPP officers assigned and a community mental health worker that we're paying for on a $12 or $13 million budget. And that is part of their responsibility as well. And I'm not certain that there's enough work that you could justify an officer just patrolling downtown areas. We get a lot of work all over the county. I'll tell you this, so if you roughly go up 24 highway and from Waterford down to Port Dover, that accounts for well over half of our calls for service, and they're not just in the major centers. So um, I can completely hear and agree with what Heidi's saying, and the need is there as well, and I respect that, and I respect her quite a bit. So it's a great suggestion. It's just as far as dedicating a bylaw officer per se, I'm not sure the work would be there to dedicate them to staying in our urban centers. A lot of work outside of that.
And if I could just briefly add to what Jim said, I mean, certainly bylaw does try to prioritize a lot of the issues that come in downtown, like the shopping carts, cleaning up the refuse out there. Those are big things for bylaw, and certainly their bylaw isn't going around trying to get people issuing loitering tickets. That's not something that we're doing. So just to clear that up, that there might be interactions with a lot of these people that are disadvantaged and do certainly need a social supports, but it's apples and oranges. They're two different things really that we're talking about.
Councillor Martin, and then Councillor Huffman's been waiting as well. So Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want to just start with, it's kind of unorthodox, but I just want to thank Jim for his honesty, because I'm sure it's awkward and difficult to go and pitch a position that's in opposition, to the direction we're heading. And I share in Mayor Chop's frustration with the position, because quite honestly, I feel that way when Mr. Burgess starts to speak, because he argues a position so aggressively and heavily, and so I understand, which I mean that as a compliment, Mr. Burgess. So I guess, speaking of awkward, I'd like to just maybe put you on the spot here and give you, if you'd like, Jim, the opportunity to comment that you're not just, I guess, arguing for the sake of arguing. Are you aware of the suggested cut?
No, I was not. I wasn't consulted about this beforehand, and the first I heard about it actually was at your meeting 2 weeks ago, and then the calls started coming in, and so I just chose to put something together that would maybe more fully explain the position in case you weren't aware. And I certainly meant no disrespect or going and doing an end run over any other division losing people. That's not what I'm about. It's just I was hired to advocate for my folks and to make things better in bylaw, and that's the whole purpose of that. If I could just steal one more minute of time here, I just wanted to respond to a couple of things for Mayor Chop. In the intervening time here, I've done a little checking. You did ask about Brantford as a comparator. It's 1 to 9,200 for them. There's 11 officers there and 102,000 population. And I just received some information that in 2019, we did not add a position. It was a replacement for a retirement. And that was brought to my attention, which I wasn't aware of. I wasn't here then. So I just wanted to clarify those things for you, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Milson. Mr. Chair, if I may continue, I was going to also ask you that, because I may have misunderstood, but we've talked about an additional FTE in your department, and it was my understanding that Mr. Enslin was 0.5 of an FTE. So unless I've missed something, are we up a full FTE presently right now with the complement with you? Are we up 0.5 of an FTE? Are you able to answer that, or Andy?
I don't know how much I can, sorry, I'm getting an echo in here.
Sorry. So I don't know how much I can say because it was part of council's closed session discussions. Certainly there was a decision for bylaw to take back one full-time position that was in two parts in building. And then what happened was bylaw was passed around to Pam Dusling, to Paula Bodis, and then to myself most recently. And it seems like in all the passing, everything's happened except that direction has been fulfilled. So really, from my perspective and maybe Jim's, this is making a whole bylaw, not while making whole bylaw was bringing Jim on staff. So I know Jim has been portrayed as somebody new, but if you look at the previous to 2018, we used to have 6 officers in the field, and we had 2 supervisors that were both half-time. So if you look at the numbers, this could be looked at as a 2-person reduction from to 2018 before this council's term.
Okay, thank you for that information. And I guess I just wanted to take the opportunity. I felt we're back on topic here, so I hate to digress, but I felt like we were really going down a rabbit hole there. Although Mayor Chop's suggestion in concert with Heidi might have some significant merit to it, we just were going to pass a deferral for terms of reference on how to spend an account so we could get money back in front of us. Yet we're discussing here trumping, to eliminating a bylaw position to bring in someone to support the downtown areas through Heidi's department / bylaw, and we have no report or information in front of us. So if that's something that is of interest to council and to Heidi, I would be happy to revisit some information on that at a later date, but not this year. I will be continuing to advocate for the retention of this position, and I know that staff are in a hard place here to present the data to us, and it's up to council to make that final call, and everyone's just trying to do their job. But I appreciate both sides of the argument here, but I will be advocating in support of Councillor Huffman's motion.
Now, I just got to ask, are there any more questions for Mr. Milson? We've sort of been treating him like a special deputation, but if there's no more questions, and then we still have some debate about a motion that's on the floor. So are there any more questions for staff?
Through the chair, I just wanted to clarify the one question that Mr. Gazelle tried to answer.
Okay, go ahead.
So when I don't know what happened prior to me coming on in the fall of 2019, but there was funding allocation, or part of the funding for the CBO and the assistant CBO came through the bylaw budget. And so there was essentially a subsidy over to the, and subsidy is the wrong term, but there was essentially an allocation from the bylaw budget to the building budget. One of the things we corrected was that the CBO and the associate or vice CBO would be fully funded from building, because that is something that we should be able to recover for building fees. The amount of supervisorial time that those 2 individuals gave to bylaw, I had conflicting reports on, to be frank. And in discussions with Ms. Bodis at the time, when she stepped in, she was, more fulsomely supervising that department. That led to the strategic decision to hire Mr. Nelson. So we have to be careful when we look at how dollars are being allocated and what FTEs are being allocated. You have to be careful on what's on paper and what's in real life. And I still maintain the fact that, by adding Mr. Milson, we had increased the actual full-time deployment of staff into that service area from where it was when I came onto the scene in the fall of 2019, and whether that's functionally or through through the actual FTE calculations. You have to remember Mr. Milson's position was accommodated by a reduction in Andy's deputy clerk's position. So we sacrificed in one area to bring on Mr. Milson. And so we lost functionality. I could have sacrificed that position for other uses, but we took out the deputy clerk's position to add in the supervisor position because, quite frankly, there was a need there, and for for that department to have better management and to be more focused. So just wanted to clear up that question that Councillor Martin had.
Sorry, point of personal privilege here. Don't we have a deputy clerk
Yeah,
again?
sorry, just to correct, that was records and information position coordinator.
Yeah, we combined two positions.
Mayor Chop, you have a question yet for staff? I think you're muted yet.
I'm sorry. Just in regards to Mr. Milson's comment about the city of Brantford, I'm speaking about on the ground.
I think it's Councillor Van Passens. When he mutes, it gets better.
Okay. Councillor Hoffman.
Andy, you're still on.
Yeah, it's Council Chambers.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just, you know, I'm speaking about actual on the ground bylaw officers. That was my comparison. And I actually got the information, Jim, right off the city of Brantford's website, where it specifically states that they have 4 uniformed city bylaw officers that are responding to their complaints. So that's where that number comes from, directly from the city of Brantford website when I did some research. And the other question I just had for staff, I know that I've heard rumblings certainly through our EOC and so on, but I'm wondering if, you know, much in the way that we've had some challenges, obviously, again, the province is spending collective agreements, 2 of the big areas that were hit. And so I'd be, I don't think it would be fair, even to public health, to sort of not bring some of these challenges up. So when the province suspended collective agreements and allowed us to change work schedules to deal with COVID issues, is there any grievances, or what grievances then could you present to council at this time, or maybe it needs to be in closed session? But I certainly would like to hear what grievances we have on the table with our bylaw department currently.
Thank you. Through the chair, as far as what I can share in open session, is there's 2 grievances, and Miss Anderson might be able to, if I screw anything up, she can fill in. But in open session, without getting into too many specific details, there's one grievance by CUPE that when the county rescinded their emergency order, even though, if you remember, that was done still in the summertime, that they are now grieving that they are to be paid shift premium overtimes for their weekend shifts, even though, again, it's one of those situations where they're only working 40 hours, and we just rotated their schedules so that they had weekend coverage. So they're grieving for that because they wanted to go back to their traditional Monday to Friday 40-hour schedule. There's a second grievance that involves we started to rent vehicles for bylaw officers because the mileage costs were quite high. It was far cheaper for us to rent vehicles. And there's a grievance that some bylaw officers believe that that this has caused economic damage to them because they could not afford the car, that their personal vehicle, without the mileage compensation has been received by the county. It's gone to a stage 2 grievance. I ruled against both of them. It's now going to go to arbitration. I don't believe I can add any more in open session on that. Council would have to waive confidentiality for us to provide any more. And I'll check with Ms. Anderson if I screwed any of that information up.
Mayor Chop, a follow-up question?
Oh, well, I just didn't know if Aaron wanted to speak, and then I'll just finish up and.
Thank you. Through the chair to council. No, Mr. Bridges covered it all, and without going into closed session, I think that's probably the most we can say at this time.
Okay, I just, I raised, you know, I think that also speaks to one of the, it was actually this council that brought that forward, was to do an analysis of whether it was operationally more efficient to lease or rent or buy a vehicle for a bylaw officer as opposed to paying mileage, because the mileage claims were so significant. And through the analysis from the finance department, we learned that it in fact was cheaper to provide them with a vehicle. So when, we're also looking at total compensation, I don't think staff misled anybody, and that the bylaw officers with total compensation are in excess of six figures when you factor all of these components in. So I, respect council's prerogative here. I think social services are a better way to go than on the boots, on the ground bylaw officers. I actually had a call today. I'll be following up with staff tomorrow. The warehouse that is adjacent to our Robinson Administration Building, I believe they've received multiple calls as an example in regards to a fence that in fact was actually installed by the owner of the Robinson Administration Building. So, again, I think that there's ways that we can better target that $100,000, but again, that's council's prerogative, but I certainly won't be lending my support to that.
Okay, and Councillor Huffman, you've been waiting patiently. So do you have questions for staff, or do we want to speak to the motion?
No, I don't have any questions for staff. Everything's been answered. I'd just like to speak to the motion. There were some good discussions that came about on this, and just a couple of points I'd like to make. In terms of looking at lobbying for more additional funds in terms of fighting the cannabis issue, I see that money as being a great use from the council initiative. In regards to Mr. Burgess speaking about looking at the feedback from individuals from the budget questionnaire, I understand that, but I also think that we need to give just as much weight to the individuals in the community who are participating while the budget discussions and deliberations are going on. I see the bylaw in terms of making, can increase revenue in terms of the fines. It's an investment in our urban core and the businesses. The cannabis issue is out of control in this area, and that was something that was very front and center at the beginning of this council's term. We're just making a small dent in it. We have a long ways to go. I feel that people are calling bylaw more often because they're getting a response to their calls. They're getting action. They're getting very concrete responses from our department. And I feel that this is part of the uptick for it. And in regards to Mayor Chop's discussions and what Heidi had to bring to the table, I think those are some great ideas, but it's also important to remember, as Councillor Van Passen often, comments, that we don't want to be in competition with the private sector. We also, for people who aren't familiar sitting at the council table, there are a lot of other collateral multidisciplinary agencies that deal with our service recipients from OW and ODSP. There's Haltom Norfolk Reach with their APSW program, their Family Respite Support program. There's CAMH. There's a lot of different ones. Can we use more? Absolutely. You'll never hear me say we can't use more. But in terms of these times, our priority as council members is to our constituents and to be looking at the best outcome for our county. And I will be obviously fully supporting this motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Huffman. Councillor Rabbit.
Thank you, and through you, I would like to reserve my second opportunity to speak to the motion, and I would like to hear from my colleagues that have not yet had an opportunity to speak specifically to the motion. So I would like to reserve my right to speak, and if you could please come back to me after we've heard from our colleagues.
Well, you're the only hand that I saw up on my screen, and I am technically challenged, and I haven't seen anybody waving at me either. So go ahead, Councillor Rabbit.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. And through you, I don't have any questions for staff. I did want to make sure before I had my closing remarks, they had gotten all of their comments out of the way or tabled, and I'm not seeing any objections or any more hands raised. I want to just respond to some of the comments from our TAO. I really appreciate his view from 3,000 feet. and I want to put some context as to, the comments we're hearing from Jim Milson. He's in a supervisory role. The gentleman has a department leadership team above him. He's got a senior leadership team above him, and they all have found a way to, respectfully disagree with each other. And we've had a lot of good information brought forward during the course of our meeting this evening. I want to circle back to the CAO's comments about, if you had $100,000, sorry, I'm recommending investing in engineering, IT, economic development. I heard all of those divisions mentioned, and I do see a lot of merit in investing in those divisions. I want to treat it separately from the specific issue. He posed the question, really, you're if you were to put this back into the budget, you're investing in bylaw. And I want to make my position clear that I do feel that bylaw is an area that we need to invest in over and above what is already budgeted for. And, if you have to have that difficult decision in terms of making that investment, are you having a service level reduction, or are you going to have an improvement somewhere? So we're not going to be realizing efficiencies from a realignment or a staffing reduction. I guess that means what I'm articulating is we do need to find some revenues. If we're not cutting expenses with this decision, Councillor Rabbits, or at least my position is, we do need to find those monies in revenues. That's effectively what I'm proposing in supporting this motion, because we're not going to be finding those monies in a realignment or a reduction of services if we're adding this back into the budget. Quite the contrary to Councillor Martin's point. I wish we could invest more in bylaw. That is why I'm supporting this motion, and that is effectively what I believe this will do for our community. This is an investment. We're acknowledging we're not accepting a service level reduction with this add back in, and we're saying we're going to be investing more into bylaw. So, I want to provide a little bit of commentary for the public just to understand. They've had various levels of leadership speak to this issue. We've heard from our boots on the ground, our supervisor works shoulder to shoulder with his team every day to enforce our bylaws in the community. We've heard from our department leadership team with Andy Grizel in supporting his staff members, and respectfully, SLT and our CAO are trying to envision the bigger picture, and they've articulated that today in a respectful manner. So, my point is, I would like to see investment in engineering, IT, and economic development. I also see a lot of value and merit in Heidi's team and in social services. But I'm making my decision today independent of those two great ideas. We do need to have investment in engineering, IT, and economic development. We do have to have social service workers dedicated to the downtown file. But irrespective of those positions, I think we do need to be making a strategic investment in our bylaw. So I support this motion. I've already spoken to the fact that I've had some sober second thought on the topic, on the issue, and I would very much like to see this added back into our budget, and I would like to see us making that investment in our bylaw services in Norfolk County.
Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, could I ask the clerk to read the motion then that is on the floor?
Thank you, Chair Van Passen. So the motion is just that that recommendation number 39 be deleted in its entirety and replaced with the following therein, that the bylaw services complement remain unchanged in 2021.
That was moved by Councillor Huffman and seconded by
Councillor Rabbits.
Councillor Rabbits. Okay. Any more debate on that? If not, would we like the recorded vote? Mr. Clerk, please.
Councillor Rabbits.
Yes.
Councillor Columbus,
Yes.
Councillor Martin,
Yes.
Councillor Huffman,
Yes.
Councillor Michele,
Yes.
Councillor Taylor,
Yes.
Mayor Chop,
No.
Chair Van Passen.
No.
The motion carries.
Thank you. And Mayor Chop, I assume you will take the chair back now?
I will. And I just see Councillor Huffman, you sent me a message. Are you stepping away now? Okay, so looks like Councillor Huffman has a commitment she has to attend to. That happens. So thank you, Councillor Huffman, for joining us. And if you want to,
My apologies, but it couldn't be helped. So I was hoping we would have been a little bit further along by now, but oh well, that's democracy.
and we all. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Chop, could I obtain 2 minutes of grace time? I just have to address council on this last matter.
Certainly.
So my phone's blown up a bit from staff, council, and I just want I want to be clear with council because I think there may have been a theme developed that I don't consult with staff or these decisions aren't put through a rigorous process. You know, all these decisions are tough, and like I said, my phone's blowing up because I got staff members in other departments that you know, viewed that debate differently. And you know, whenever we're looking at the types of potential reductions, you know, at one point in time it was up to 50 people. I hope council can understand that those types of discussions can't, you know, be done on a organizationally wide consultative process because it creates way too much static in the organization. We were very clear about all the departments. If you remember, the issuance in December of our public document created a fair amount of stir, both internally and externally, when we identified, you know, more than 50 FTEs and we named all the departments. And then again, we when we issued the final budget with 25 FTEs, we named all the departments that were being addressed. So, you know, we tried to be as transparent as possible, but we can't go down the organizational ladder all the way down. I try to have discussions with, you know, the general managers and the directors at those levels, and they're taken seriously. So I just want clarity to council that you know, that those discussions and those deliberations are had. There are gives and takes, quite frankly. You know, Heidi's team, you know, took almost $1 million cut, you know, on their gives and takes. So they were, you know, heavily consulted. So I just, you know, these types of decisions cause, you know, organizational discrepancies or disagreements at all levels of the organization. And it's, you know, and I try to be as transparent and as open as possible, you know, and that's why I have no problem with staff members having open discussions with counselors. I have no problem with staff members, you know, informing council of differences of opinion within the deliberation process. You just have to understand the fact that these decisions are tough, and all the decisions cause, you know, whatever decision you have cause issues and concerns throughout the organization. So there's lots of staff members listening to these budgetary debates. It's probably, if you look at the viewership, it's probably 90% staff as they go through these things. I just want to make sure the impression of council is this is not we're not doing this as kind of a star chamber. It's hidden from staff. These are tough decisions. People's livelihoods depend on these decisions, and we can't go willy-nilly when we have these discussions, especially when, frankly, we don't know what the final decision is going to be. So So we will, as senior staff, we'll take this away and we'll work on better ways to present these discussions in the future so that we don't cause the type of unsettlement that happened here tonight internally within the organization. So I'll probably have some repair to do over the next few days in a number of departments going forward. But I did just want to pass that on to council. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jason, for your comments. Council, did you want a 5-minute break again, or are we okay for the next item? Press on. Okay, stand by. Let's see here. Sorry, just pulling up. The next resolution was number 40, Councillor Columbus. Museums.
I'm sorry, I don't recall pulling that one. Somebody else must have.
Somebody else pull that item? Councillor Martin?
Thanks, Mayor Top. I thought Councillor Columbus beat me to it. Again, just this is the final call, final opportunity. I wanted to table it in case there is any changes in direction. My position has stayed the same, but I would be interested in having a final discussion around making an amendment to the staff recommendation, and that is specific to preservation of the 4th position overall. It is the 3rd position in our list. And from where I sit, I really feel as though this motion was drafted in a way that had council members choosing one or the other, choosing a service level reduction in our museums to save the Linwood Arts Board for a year or vice versa. So I would like to continue on supporting Linwood Arts Management Group in the grant for $50,000. Mr. Burgess has told us more information will come back to council, and that it's not funded from the existing levy dollars. I additionally would like to endorse staff's recommendation respecting museum reductions with the exception of the position 4, which is the 3rd museum position. Thank you. You are muted.
Thanks. Miss Andy, I guess maybe you could give some direction at this point.
Sorry. You want a revised motion, Mayor Chop?
Well, the motion was there. It was I don't know. However you think it's best to handle this. If Councillor Martin has another motion on the floor, I mean that was the reason for the motion as it was, in my view, was because we weren't moving ahead with that position, and we would use it was all baked into one for me. But I'm not sure. Do you just treat this at this point then as another motion that's overriding the previous one, and then if it fails, it reverts to the original? I think I'm just getting tired.
we all might be. So, Councillor Martin, you wanted to change paragraph 4 of that motion?
If I could provide clarity. No, I'm okay with the motion in its entirety, with the exception of one small change, which would be on the first sentence. That committee endorsed staff's recommendation respecting the museum reductions. That part I'd like to change because I'm hoping to hope you can't see my paper on the screen there. Hoping to preserve the 3rd position identified on our closed session document for museums, which is position number 4 overall on that document.
Okay.
All of the other recommendations from staff can remain in the endorsement. I'd like to just separate the one.
Okay. Yeah. So then it would be an amending motion that to amend the main motion that the committee endorsed staff recommendations aside from position number 4 on the confidential attachment.
And so then if it fails, then it just remains as the original motion. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah, again, I think it's all about a choice of where we want to allocate money. And we're looking at social services and downtown issues and we're spending north of 1.3 million on museums, which is almost, I believe, around 3 times the provincial average. So I won't be changing my position, but is there a seconder for Councillor Martin's motion? Okay, it doesn't look like I see a seconder, Councillor Martin. Okay, moving on to the next item. I see is number 42, Councillor Martin, in regards to the paramedic services.
I did not pull that.
Councillor
Madam Chair,
Columbus?
I have a hand up with respect to that item 40. I just want to be assured that each of our museums are treated fairly and equally. I'd like a comment from whoever's in charge of that particular department now. Is it Mr. Cridlin or Mr. Sloan?
It would be Mr. Sloan.
Through the mayor, yes, we will be strategizing on how we can have the equal and fair treatment for the museums.
Thanks, Brandon. Okay, item 42. Did anybody pull item 42?
Apologies, Mayor Chop. I think that was to clarify the dollar amount, but I think that's taken care of now.
Okay, so moving on then, we are nearing the end here. So now we're on to number 50, which was the borrowing from the Legacy Fund. Councillor Van Passen.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Do we want to take a break before this one? If we discussed those small items individually that much time, I think the $5 million one, it might take a little longer.
Sure, why don't we come back then at 6:35? That's almost 10 minutes. Does that work? Is that enough time? Perfect. Are you tapping at me, Councillor Rabbit?
The time is upon us.
It is, but we're still
6:30.
missing 2 members here, so it's a pretty $5 million discussion. I'd kind of like them present for the whole thing.
Hey, I concur, but our viewing public might wonder what we're doing.
Well, we're here on screen for them to see, so obviously we're ready and waiting. We're just waiting for Councillor Columbus and Councillor Michelle.
I'm here, Madam Mayor.
All right, looks like we are back. Councillor Van Passen, I don't have the number in front of me now. Was it number 42?
Number 50, I think it is on
Number
the.
50. Let's see here, sorry. Just lost my spot. Correct, number 50, borrowing from the Legacy Fund, and Councillor Van Passen, if you'd like to go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Last week I might have went about this the wrong way, but we've been dealing with a budget. This county finds itself in a structural deficit with its budgeting. The reserves funds have been cleaned out, and nobody wants any services cut because they're getting used to that. And we have put our staff in quite a position when we're, last summer requested an inflationary increase in the tax rates, even though we're trying to fix a structural deficit, we're trying to replenish the reserves, and we're trying to look for cuts in service all at the same time. And one of the options they came forward with was a temporary loan from the Legacy Fund to sort of smooth out a tax increase and create an artificial increase to the taxes. And I have thought about it before. I've thought about it again seriously over the last week, and I just cannot find myself borrowing money from ourselves to create an artificial tax rate. The services that the people want cost money, and we can't borrow money from one credit card to pay another credit card to pay another credit card, because that's what's got us in the problem in the first place. So I would sort of put forth the motion that the committee not support staff recommendation of a one-time loan from the Legacy Fund. But along with that, I would have to ask Mr. Burgess, there is a prediction of a surplus from the 2020 budget, and according to Section 270 of the Municipal Act, that surplus is supposed to be included as revenue in the next year's budget. And I think our staff proposal is to put that into a contingency reserve. But I wonder if we forego taking a loan from ourselves, but also include last year's surplus as revenue in this year's budget, that would probably reduce another point off of the tax levy. It's dollars our taxpayers already spent last year, so we should give it back to them as quick as possible. So between the two of those, it would look to me like approximately a 4% increase over and above the 3.3 that was predicted so far, which we're probably up to 3.4 by now. So we'd be looking at a 7.4% increase in the taxes. And if that's what it costs, we can't pretend it doesn't, and we should collect the amount of money that is required to pay our bills. So that would be my motion to reverse item number 50 on the minutes.
Seconder? Councillor Martin, did you wish for me to ask staff for comment like you just put forward? Did you wish?
If Mr. Burgess could comment on the potential of using the actual surplus or potential surplus from
Okay, so,
2020.
but your motion's on the floor regardless of the
Okay.
outcome of this
Yes.
discussion. Okay. Jason?
Yeah, through the chair to council, one of the recommendations that we had put forth, if you remember, there was a number of them, including like not to run a deficit. One of them was that any annual surpluses would be transferred to the reserves until we met our asset management obligations. Council can always waive on that, but that's the recommendation. The challenge with I just want to be clear that I understand the question. When a municipality runs a surplus, it then you generally get a surplus deficit report sometime in June after the audit is done, June or July, and then there's usually a motion to transfer the surplus or deficit to a reserve. That's where the income, quote unquote, comes in. It's income to the reserve. It's too early for me to tell you, or for finance to tell you where our surplus is going to be. I know we're going to have a surplus. I know it's going to be a healthy one. But I wouldn't feel comfortable dedicating a particular amount. It doesn't really change the situation what Councillor Van Passen is saying, because if I understand Councillor Van Passen's motion, he's really just saying, let's increase the levy to the 9% mark. That fixes the structural deficit, and then when we have the surpluses, you can deal with them at that point in time for future spending considerations. Unless I misunderstood that, because you're not asking for like a 7% increase and then using $2 million from this year's surplus to fill in that gap.
Yeah, actually, that's what I'm asking for, is that we sort of estimate that a reasonable conservative estimate of a surplus and lower the rate by that amount. If there ends up that our surplus is higher than that estimate, that would go into that same contingency reserve. And this is why I also pulled item 55, because if we change this, we have to change that other motion as well.
Okay, so the one challenge with using a one-time surplus is it doesn't fix the structural deficit, because the differential between spending and income would still be there the following year. So you would then have to find that hole for the next year. So if we need 9% to fix the structural deficit, if we only use 7%, then that means that we can fix it for 1 year, but then staff would either have to find the 2% in cuts in the future or increase revenue by 2%. And that's fine, council can do that. I would say though, it's no different, frankly, than using the legacy fund. The only thing with using the legacy fund is then we're obligated under a bylaw to repay it back. If you use it as surplus, it's not very well tracked, would be the same thing. So you'd be in the exact same position if you wanted to do that. My suggestion would be, councillor, we could lower the amount that you borrow from the legacy fund, and then when the surplus is known at the end of the year after the audit is done, you can then direct the surplus to repay back the legacy fund to the amount you'd like. And that would be a much cleaner version of that, and you would know all the facts at the table. Because then you would have the auditor's report on what the surplus is, and then you can then just early pay back the legacy fund, and you're in the exact same position, and it's far more transparent. It gets you exactly where you want to be. You're only then borrowing it for 6 months from the legacy fund at that point in time. I would just hate to guess, and then 6 months from now, there's a much different amount on the surplus.
Apologies. Further, Councillor Van Passen?
Well, I guess I should ask the mover if he wants to split the question or the motion then, and just put the motion on the floor.
I think you moved the motion, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. So if the motion on the floor would just be the part about the loan, and then part two, depending on how that goes, we could use the CAO's suggestion of changing the amount of a loan to be repaid when the surplus comes in mid-year, if those options. But I just cannot find it in myself to borrow from money, have the county borrow money from the county to make an artificial tax rate. And I don't see how that fixes a structural deficit any better than using last year's surplus. And yeah, I can't see how either way we need to collect more money. That's what it costs. We've tried making cuts. That didn't go over very well. There's always some group that needs or wants or has to have that particular service, and we have a hard time cutting it. And again, we look down the road. Next year, we got to go through this program again and cut just as much or more than we did this year. And the year after that, do it again. And I think I said last week that they might be overconfident to think that's going to happen. And it's, yeah, a longer term plan to fix the structural deficit. So why not bite the bullet now and put the tax bill to what it's actually costing and move on? I guess that was the rip the Band-Aid off approach that you mentioned before, Mr. Burgess. So.
That is correct. And Councillor Van Passen is correct. The borrowing from the legacy fund does not fix the structural deficit, neither does using a one-time surplus from 2020 fix the structural deficit. The only thing I was just trying to do was allow council to pick the rate that they want to do. Staff is saying borrow $5 million because we're $5 million short from the legacy fund and pay that back in 2 years. What you could choose to borrow zero from the legacy fund and just raise the taxes to approximately 9% to fix the full structural deficit. You can choose to only borrow $2 million and then raise it to 7%. And then with the explicit intent that any surplus in 2020, once it's confirmed by the auditors, be immediately repaid to the legacy fund. And then that way you're paying that back, and then you're only then dealing with a $2 million structural deficit at that point in time. It's just a suggestion to make it cleaner so that staff know exactly what the instructions are for how they're going to fill in that structural deficit if it still exists.
Councillor Van Passen, so I'm not really sure what motion you have on the table anymore. So if you could clean that up for me, that'd be helpful. And then I'll ask the seconder if she's in agreement. Councillor Rabbits, I see you as well as Councillor Michelli, but we've got a motion on the table, so we'll just understand what the motion actually is.
The motion is to not accept staff recommendation of borrowing $5 million from the legacy fund in 2021.
Okay, and seconder is Councillor Martin. Councillor Rabbits, go ahead. You're on mute this time.
Oh, sorry, I'm having a hard time with the hand or the mute button. I'm all right now. Thank you, and through you, I wasn't hoping to speak to the motion at this juncture. I had a few questions of staff, and I'm hoping you'll permit me to ask those. I wanted to find out from staff if this motion was approved, what the net levy requirement would be, and where we'd end up with our numbers for the residential tax increase. And while I buy you a little bit of time to start answering that question or collect your thoughts, I had quite a bit of correspondence from either side of the fence about I'm willing to bite the bullet, as my colleague had said, now and pay our bills when they are due, rather than kicking that can down the road. Appreciating it's COVID-19 times and people do have a limited ability to pay in addition to living through a global pandemic. So we've heard these arguments from both sides of the fence, I would say. But my concern is I want to know in hard numbers what the net levy requirement would be and what we could see in terms of residential tax increase, because this is going to be a major driver in that.
Through the chair, I'll start, and my staff are online, but to get rid of we're borrowing $5 million from the legacy fund. So to fix that, it would be a $5 million tax increase, which is about a 5% increase. So we would just be under 9% tax increase or levy budget increase going forward. I'm not sure what that translates into on the household basis, though I would remind council that we gave the presentation to council showing the use of this strategy, and the lines going up, if you remember. And in the long run, after 10 years, you are paying less on the rip the Band-Aid off strategy, but you're paying more upfront for that. So that would be, again, when you look on the far side, the rip the Band-Aid off strategy was cheaper in the long run, but significantly, 5% greater on the short run. I'll have either, if Kathy or Catherine has what that would translate into, we can have that, or we can do a quick email to all the council.
If I may, and I appreciate that, I would like to have that information, because we have a lot of different figures here, from a 12% increase, and we've worked our way down from there. And that has a different impact on the residential property owner than our overall figures. So it's good to have those 2 percentage points. If you have those, I see you back on.
Sure. Yeah. So to be clear to everyone who's tracking at home, the 12% increase was prior to any cuts. We cut $3 million of ballpark to get it down to the 9% increase, and then borrowed another 5% increase. And I'll have staff take over. They've taken over the screen there for council to see, and they can walk through it.
No, that's okay. Are you going to go ahead or me? You. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Rabbits and Jason. So Catherine's actually has on the screen the impact for the approved 2021 tax increase. So the revised levy is now $109,735,600 for an 8.8% increase. And that translates into a 7.7% residential tax rate on an average assessment value of $240,000, or a monthly increase of $19.52. Just a point of clarification there, Kathy. Is that actually where our average residential home in Norfolk County is still sitting? We keep using this $240,000 number. I find that hard to believe, and I know people have raised it before, but we must have that from MPAC. Through the mayor, yes, and to council, that is correct. The 240,000, you'll see that this year the assessment value from 2020 and 21 is the same value. That's because we didn't, this year they've held the CBA assessments, so there has been no change to that. We've left it at that. Our tax collector does go through MPAC to get the information. Generally, you do see an increase in that amount on an annual basis. And is that the median? And you are correct. It's generally council has questioned the actual amount, and it's actually the median assessment. I should clarify that. Sorry, my apology. I'm saying the average, but it is the median amount that is calculated, and council has questioned it in the past, and our tax collector has double checked and talked to Impact, and that is the number. Further, Councilor Rabbits, go ahead. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that little piece there.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much for asking those questions, Mayor Chop. That was welcomed on my side of the screen. Thank you for coming back to me. I did have a further question. We've had a significant amount of deliberations over 4 days. I'm glad that we took the amount of time that we did to derive at our decisions. I think it bodes well for not only staff but council members that we've really doubled, quadrupled the amount of time we're focusing on the budget during the COVID budget this year, and I just want to thank you all for all the work that you've put in. And this is sort of leading into a question. Staff have witnessed this take place over a number of days. I want to know what their ultimate recommendation is. We have a levy relief strategy. to borrow $5 million, but a lot has transpired between that original recommendation and where we're at today, this evening. And I just want to make sure that, you know, that $5 million, with $3 million being recognized in budget cuts, less a few decisions by council, and $2 million plus for a future day, a future decision. You know, I want to make sure that what was originally presented to us in our binder is still what staff is recommending. What's their best recommendation, you know, at the end of our deliberations here? It's got to be a little different than at the outset.
Through the chair to councillor, I think it's a good question. I would say my observation, I classified my observation in a few areas, and I'll let the treasurer speak after. At the end of the day, Norfolk County has a problem. As I've outlined before, our spending has gone up $28 million just in a few short years. And if you just divide that by 65,000 people, you understand how much more we're spending on a per capita basis. And the structural deficit, as Councillor Van Passen has alluded to, and I've sent in my emails to council, that is not going away. We are spending more money than we take in. You know, the only way you fix that is by increasing revenue or decreasing cost. The rip the Band-Aid off solution, which is what Councillor Van Passen is essentially putting back on the table, means you're going to increase the revenue to fix that hole. And either solution will work. One takes 3 years to work and means more cuts. I will be more blunt than Councillor Van Passen's assessment. My observation over these 4 days is I am not sure this council, and I'll be blunt and straightforward, I am not sure this council can decide to make $5 million worth of more cuts. And I think council needs to weigh that decision in, because next year, if you thought these $3 million worth of cuts were tough, next year's $3 million of cuts will be even tougher. And the year after that, those $2 million of cuts will be even tougher. So my honest assessment after watching this is I think council needs to ponder whether they can actually reduce their spending to meet or to address the structural deficit on the expense side. The revenue side is a tool that council can use to increase taxes to address the structural deficit. So only council can make that decision. Council has to go to the county to sell the tax increase or sell the cuts, and it's whatever council feels appropriate. All staff really wants to do is fix the problem at the end of the day and get on a sustainable footing going forward. Because until we fix this financial structural deficit, it is very difficult to grow and prosper, because all we're doing is we're butting our heads up against the fact that we're spending more money than we're taking in. So we either have to make the decisions to spend less or increase revenue. And that is, staff have prepared both options for council. And it's really up to council to decide. My personal view is based upon these discussions. I think it's very, I think the budget cuts are weighing very heavily on this council. They weighed very heavily on staff. And I think council needs to look at whether they can do $5 million worth of more cuts over the next 2 years. Hopefully that addresses the question, and I'll have Ms. LaPlante, the treasurer, provide any further comment on that, or Ms. Darlington, who oversees finance and corporate services, provide comment.
Can I ask one question as well, Kathy? Maybe Catherine could run the numbers just while you're providing that commentary. One of my concerns, one of the communications that we received from a member in downtown Simcoe was in terms of the, looking at that, here's the impact to we always say the average residential homeowner, but that's the median. And $300 is no big deal. But could we just factor that in since the beginning of this term of council? So where we sat with 88 million and what that impact actually is now on an annual basis? And then I just know that'll take a few minutes to run. So I just thought while you deliver your comments, maybe they could work on that.
Through the mayor and to council, of course, Catherine's going to run some of those numbers for you. But in the meantime, I just want to compliment what Jason has said. I must admit, the first time the legacy fund borrowing concept was discussed, I was most definitely, that was not my favorite path to go down. It definitely was not, I think, any of finance's staff's preference. We did this wasn't, just an all of a sudden discussion. It was discussed over the summer for a long time. And with COVID coming into play, it became even more difficult. And thinking about the residents of Norfolk County, Jason is 100% right. The first year finding some cuts wasn't too bad, but as you saw in the first year, we still have not implemented all of those cuts, and we're still struggling to get those. So the additional $5 million is most definitely going to be difficult. And as I mentioned at the beginning of deliberations, it's going to be really tough. It's not only going to be tough for finance, it'll be tough on council, it'll be tough on the residents of Norfolk County. We need to find that balance between services, what services are going to be provided, and the affordability of the taxpayer. And we did get to actually live with our recommendation with the legacy fund. And again, it was mostly because of COVID. But I also looked at it, well, maybe there are some other opportunities, and that if we had a little bit more time, that we could find additional savings. But again, I'm very leery, and I'm not sure about finding actually $5 million. And if we did find $5 million in savings, would there be a willingness to actually accept those savings? So again, rip the Band-Aid off right away. Again, is the best solution as far as I'm concerned. There's more coming down the road, I'm sure, for Norfolk County. We'll have asset management plans coming into play, the issues with the water, wastewater, etc. And we still want to provide all the services that Norfolk County is currently receiving. And to do that, we need to increase taxes, raise our revenue, and to replenish our reserves to get back on a better path for financial sustainability. So with that, maybe Shelley might like to jump in.
Thanks, Kathy, and through Mayor Chop. Just to add an additional comment is exactly as Mr. Burgess said, that these recommendations were very difficult and weighed heavily on staff, as they do the community and council. And one of the reasons for the recommendation in the budget report about the formal establishment of a working committee was the concern that staff has with getting to those next options and those next service level reductions in order to meet those further budget cuts. So that was one way staff felt that in order to stay on track, and it will be very difficult to continue with such significant reductions, it was very important to establish a formal working committee with regular reporting to council, because the reductions are going to become much more difficult to achieve over the next number of years.
Who's next? Councillor Michelle?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to comment that when we originally approved this strategy, one of the key elements in it was that we were going to buy some time to look for ways to make all of these cuts in the future. And for me, that was the biggest selling point in that strategy. because I have confidence that our staff can come up with these, but I have been hearing now some comments that are sounding a little bit more dire than they were originally about our ability or the opportunity to make some of those cuts. So I am starting to now, after some sober second thought, lean to perhaps we do need to remove that bandage a little more quickly and maybe bite that bullet a little bit harder than we otherwise intended. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Mayor. Just to be clear, it's not just the ability to come up with the ideas to make the cuts. It's the ability to have those cuts accepted, and that's where to be clear, I'm having concerns, and I think staff are having concerns. They're tough on staff internally. As I said before, if I have a director or a GM or a supervisor that doesn't want more money in their budget, I probably have the wrong person there, because they're all dedicated to move forward. We do have the ability to make more service cut, but they are service cuts. We're not at the point now. There's no fat. There's no. Everyone thinks, oh, there's all this stuff going on. We've cut all that stuff out. Now we're looking at what are the types of services we can afford going forward, and where's the priority for that dollar amount. And I'm just not sure that if we brought more service level cuts to this council and to the community, whether there's enough votes there to reduce services by another $5 million, because that's really what it's going to take if you don't want to increase revenue. And like I said, even with the cuts that we're having, and just to be clear, even if you do a 9% increase now, you're not out of the woods yet. We're still behind on asset management, on our core assets. I've been directed by this council to come back next month or the month after with a report on how to replace our recreational facilities. That's a $70 million bill out there that we got to deal with. This council is going to be deciding on the water wastewater rate side, which this council's already approved a plan to increase water and wastewater rates by about 6% a year for the next number of years, for a $100 million program on that. So even if you fix the structural deficit today, we're still going to have challenges going forward. So I just want to be clear, staff have a laundry list. We have well over 75 ideas that we can put on the table. But as you can tell, it took 30 some odd concepts or ideas to get to $3 million. And the two biggest ones on the table or the three biggest ones were all related to headcount reductions. Because at the end of the day, our payroll, as I went through the numbers before, our payroll makes up about 60% of what we do. And when you take a look at our payroll, Norview is our biggest business unit. And when you take a look at Norview and public health, that accounts for well over 30% of our payroll. And if we're not cutting there, then we're cutting on all the other units. And that, and that becomes a challenge for this council. So I don't want the impression my staff have worked very hard. We will continue to look for efficiencies. We do have a list, a page of things that we're going to go through. But I just think after reflecting on these 4 days, that was the question from Councillor Rabbits, I am not sure, I am not sure this council, if I were to assess it, can actually pull the trigger and cut $5 million more from the budget. And I think that is that's my assessment. And the council may disagree with me, and that's great. And I'm just telling you, I think I see a lot more gray hair on certain councillors because of this budget. I'm not sure you want to do this two more times. I apologize for the personal commentary, but I believe Councillor Rabbit's question was, I think he wanted a frank opinion from staff
but Jason,
on our assessment.
just so we're not also misleading right now, you are still saying that with the 9% you just said we're not out of the woods. I don't want people to think that if you're doing 9% this year, you know, it's 0% or 1% next year. That there is still a need, although not as aggressive, but to find significant cuts.
That's correct. You've Councillor Van Passen last year made the comment that the first way you get out of a hole is to stop digging. All this really does is stops your digging, and now you then have to deal with the other challenges that you have before you. So it sets you back to zero, and now you have to then deal with your challenges, which are your asset management, any type of service level improvement you actually want to do, any type of strategic investments you want are all there. And so we will still have challenges going forward. You're just not behind the 8 ball with a structural deficit. Like, if you think about it from a household, if you make $100,000 and on day one, you need to spend $105,000. Every decision you're $5,000 behind from the day you start. And how do you make that up? And you either got to get another job or cut your expenses, and that's the position council's in. And even then, if you get to even in the household, then you got to figure out, okay, how am I going to retire? What's my savings for retirement? How am I going to pay for the kids' education? How when the roof leaks, how am I going to pay for that new roof? If I were to boil it down to that household decision, that's the best way I can translate it. All that rip the Band-Aid off does is get your expenses in line so that you're not putting it on a visa, you're not doing that, but you're also not addressing retirement, you're not addressing fixing the house or replacing your car. That would be the next set of challenges we have to do.
Kathy, is there any chance was Catherine able to come up with a number of the, again, it's not that it's just $300 this year to the average homeowner, but what the average homeowner has been subjected to since this council now has come into their term?
To the chair, Mayor Chop, this is Catherine standing on the line now. So I was able to come up with those figures for you. So if we turn back the clock to 2018, the median homeowner at that time in Norfolk County was paying total taxes of $2,703.89. Okay, and if we're now considering to approve no levy relief strategy, that's what this model assumes, our 2021 taxes for the median homeowner would be $3,266.38. So that is an increase of $562.49 since 2018, and that represents a 20% increase.
And sorry, Kath, I just missed it. That's with the using the legacy fund or without?
That is without using the legacy fund.
Okay, 20% since 2018. I just think it's important for council to always put this in perspective. We see one of the letters we had, well, it's just 12%, but it's not just 12% this year, because people on a fixed income, their income hasn't changed by 20% over the last 3 years. So, it may just be $500 to 500 and what is that, $563, to those above that median, but below, that's Christmas presents or food on the table or so on. I saw a couple more hands, and I'm just wondering, I could either, of course, I can't debate on the motion here, but I was wondering if council would indulge me, given the significant nature of this item, to allow me to speak on the motion. I see Councillor Michelle is waving his head, and otherwise I can reserve my comments till the end. But I'm seeing agreement to Councillor Rabbits. Is that a no? Should I call it? I guess it would be my request to waive the rules of procedural order so that I can speak on it. Councillor Michelle?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would support that request.
Is there a seconder for Councillor Michelle? I see your hand, Councillor Columbus. I will come to you. Councillor Van Passen? And all those in favor? I see 4 out of, what are we now, 7? So I believe, Andy, is that 2/3?
Mayor Chop, 6 out of, oh, is there? Yeah, so it would be
Right,
5.
5.
5
Okay.
is there's only 7, yeah, so you'd need 5.
Okay, thank you. So I'll go to the other councillors first. Councillor Columbus. I think you're on mute, sir.
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. And I support staff's original idea of using the legacy fund, that strategic approach. The ripping off the Band-Aid situation, I cannot support. I'll tell you, the last couple of months, I've had occasions where children have opening the doors to an empty fridge shelf. Seniors are scraping to pay their monthly utility bills. The working poor have maxed out their credit cards. I had one call on that. And some are foregoing the purchase of dental needs right now during these COVID times. Plus, we have an $11 million outstanding taxes owed to the county. So I cannot support this rip off the Band-Aid approach that's been suggested by Councillor Van Passen. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, did I see you, or I can come back to you as well? Councillor Columbus and I don't often agree on things, but we do on this one. In ordinary times, I would never support this. I do believe this council, I can stand behind, you know, let me rephrase that. I remember when we started, and in our—
Sorry, point of order. I thought that we just didn't get a majority for you to speak on it. Not that I don't want you to advocate for the issue, because I do agree it's a big, very big issue, but we've had budget committee.
We did get a majority, Councillor Martin. It was 5.
Andy said we did not.
Sorry, you probably didn't, maybe I cut out at the end there. 5 out of 7 is 2/3, sorry.
Okay, and then again, can we not let the other council members who have been waiting speak?
I just saw Councillor Taylor's hand up, and I just asked him if he would like to comment, and that was the only other hand that I saw at that point in time that was up. So I get that we want to have a fight at every opportunity. I just want to provide my comments. I was elected by every resident in this county. It is a massive decision. I asked council for the privilege. You actually spoke on a motion at one point in time without asking for the privilege. I've asked for the privilege. Council's granted to me. It will only take a minute, but Councillor Martin, if you would like the floor first, by all means.
I didn't disagree that you couldn't speak to it.
The floor, Councillor Martin, is yours.
I'm still speaking, Mayor Top. I didn't disagree that you couldn't speak to it. I just was clarifying. First, I didn't, because we've had multiple budget meetings. So if you'd like to fight, then that's okay.
If you would like to speak right now, the floor is yours.
So I was clarifying with the clerk about the vote, and additionally, I can see Councillor Taylor's hand is raised. That was all I was doing. I do wish to speak for it. I can wait my turn. I misunderstood the vote.
Councillor Taylor, I believe I asked you directly if you would like to speak at that moment, or if you were comfortable if I spoke, and I would come back to you. If you would prefer the floor right now, I certainly didn't mean to intimidate you to not speak at that moment.
All is well. My comment is it's obviously on topic, but a little bit to the side of what we're talking about right now. So you're speaking directly to what the specific issue to this is. So by all means, please.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I appreciate that. So coming back, again, lost my train of thought here, but Councillor Columbus, again, we don't often agree, but we do on this one. And in ordinary times, I would not support this. When we were initially elected, we had a budget orientation meeting, and it was the first talk from then staff, obviously a very different finance department than what we have now. And there was talk of raising taxes. And there was no talk of cuts. And, to me, I consistently maintained that, yes, to some degree, there is a revenue problem in Norfolk County, but there is also a bigger problem, which is an expense problem in Norfolk County. And you know, I shared Jason and Kathy's concerns deeply that, you know, maybe this isn't possible to pull off. But I always believed in the beginning what this was going to do with the legacy fund, using some portion of the legacy fund with strict terms, repayment terms. This is very different than drawing out of reserve accounts like we have done in the past with the public not knowing about it. The roads reserve didn't get into a $20 million hole with council's, you know, approval over and over and knowing how bad it was. I mean, that was one of the things that we insisted on, that I campaigned on, that we brought forward. It was having, you know, variance reports of knowing where this municipality stood. And so, you know, when staff brings forward now this recommendation, it's not just let's use $5 million from the legacy fund and call it a day. It's $5 million, but we have to keep working and keep making those cuts. And do I have concerns like staff as to whether or not, given council's appetite for making those cuts? I also don't know that that's possible down the road. But what is very unique about this year and all the other years before, I was approached at one point by the chamber when they, by the Simcoe chamber, when they realized that we were going to be getting provincial and federal funding. And they asked if some of that money could be allocated specifically for economic recovery opportunities for our local businesses. And you know, the challenge, number one, that money is obviously directly related to many of the costs that we have assumed as the county. And our staff did come up with a way of working with the Economic Recovery Task Force to allocate some funds for our businesses and for that recovery program. But one of the big questions when I talked to staff about you know, that possibility or that opportunity, and what they said to me made, you know, perfect sense, was how do you in a pandemic pick and choose which businesses are going to get funding from Norfolk County taxpayers and which ones are not going to get funding? And so that is very real to me. The other piece I have to look at is we have so many people in the service industry and so on in Norfolk County that are on a fixed income. And this year has been a year like no other, and next year will be a year like no other. So if ever there was a time for us to dig deep, and, you know, I'm afraid that if we don't do this, then it's going to be looked at council next year. You'll notice in your binders, I think we had like, staff could correct me, but the counts or the staff initiatives, the new budget initiatives that were brought forward were very, very nominal this year. I think it was the ash trees and it was maybe $50,000. That's not something we've ever seen in the past with staff coming forward. They've been asking to add additional positions in different departments and so on and so forth. And I think that this keeps the pressure on, that we have to keep making the cuts next year and the year after that and the year after that to be able to reduce that structural deficit that Jason talks about. So again, in an ordinary year, pre-pandemic, not something I would have supported. But I think this keeps the pressure on us to keep doing right by the taxpayers. And I think that you can't sit there and say it's only a 9% increase this year. It's not only a 9% increase this year, it's 20% increase since this council came into power. So with that, that's all my comments. I won't be supporting the motion. Last year, I probably would be very different and I would have supported the motion. But in these trying times, I don't think delivering a 9% tax increase is remotely. It's just, we have people in the community that simply, you know, that don't even have, to come back to the comments from last week, that don't even have a counselor's position to rely on, but actually have families and are on a fixed income with no position. So with that, Councillor Taylor, I'll come back to you first.
Thank you, and through you. Regardless of what happens here, regarding the surplus that we discussed earlier that Councillor Van Pasten brought up during the very start of this discussion, assuming that this doesn't pass, are we still comfortable moving to have that surplus go to paying back the legacy fund at the end of this year? Or is that something, if this doesn't pass, that we should have a report come back later in the year? Because as we discuss this, I would like to have a little bit more information on how we move forward past this day with that contribution to the legacy fund. So Jason, would that be something that you'd like a decision on tonight if we are taking the $5 million, or that you would be more comfortable having a report come back to us?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I think Council, what I would prefer to see is Council could make that decision tonight if they so choose, or Council could wait until the audited financial statements are prepared, and then Council can direct the surplus to how they see fit. Staff have provided motions to develop a policy that says that all surpluses would be put back into reserves until the asset management deficit would be created. However, any staff policy like that or council policy can be overridden by council, and you can direct it at that point in time. I would say it would be just easiest for council to have that kick at the can when the actual information is in front of them with the audited report being completed.
Okay, thank you. And
I'll let Kathy LaPlante correct me if she thinks that there's a better way, but I would think that would be the easiest way to deal with it.
That sounds good, Jason.
Okay, and further, were the original calculations that we saw the very first budget day, was that made with the assumption that the surpluses would be going back into reserves?
That is correct, yes. We were always making those assumptions that would go back into reserves.
Okay.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. In an effort to advocate for my position without arguing, I would like to state for the record that I support all of my colleagues and respect their opinions on this. This one is a difficult one, and to say that we're gonna find the right answer and hit the nail on the head, we all know that we aren't. So I don't try to sway you in my comments. I just want to use this opportunity as an effort to get it off my chest and get it onto the public record. And I just would ask you to think what the word legacy means to you, because although we are going to do a lot of great things for community members that aren't even all that great, they're necessary things, like Councillor Columbus said, having food in a fridge and you know, having the lights on and the heat on. I get it. I really, really do. But I'm starting to feel like a bit of a trust fund baby here, that I've been given some money and I'm squandering it and setting the bad spending precedent. And I know that's a bad analogy, but that's how I'm feeling. Like we've been given something so unique and so important and so valuable, and we are its keepers. And I do have the same concerns that all of us have expressed. I think it's evident today that this is not our first or second budget. There's, you know, a real evident divide and split in the way that councillors are going. And I myself have changed leaps and bounds since our first and second budget. And I think as we continue on, that's only going to get more difficult. We are going to have these hard conversations about cuts in service levels and impacts. And, you know, what I feel is right here, although it's not easy and it keeps me up at night, is to preserve the integrity of that fund, because I fear for what future councils may do in the future. I think it's evident that there will probably be another council that's going to come in and look to do some restoration on some of the decisions and cuts we've made, and that's just politics, and the pendulum swings, and they're going to need money for that. And I fear that we've tapped into this account and we've set that precedent. But if I switch it the opposite way, what is the precedent we're setting by having this conversation here today and choosing to not pull on that fund? How much more difficult will it be in the future for those council members to have this same conversation that we're having, knowing that we made the choice to not pull on it? The pressure would be amplified, and the hopefully the feeling that I'm feeling that we are the keepers of the fund would be just tenfold for them, and it would remain as a legacy. It's not for potholes. It's not for artificially subsidizing and settling out our tax rates. It's for community legacy projects. And I just, that's where I struggle, and that's where I sit. And we know these tough cuts are coming, and that it is part and parcel with some of the decisions that we need to make here. I would be happy to look at the route of the surplus and waiving a policy. I don't like the concept of it even flowing through the legacy fund, if I'm being honest. And I know that I say this in a bit of a privileged position, as I was the only person that voted in opposition of this. I know that, it's easy for me to say these things and maybe think that it might not even pass, but I have to say them, and it's just truly how I feel about this situation, that we may be even setting a stronger precedent if we don't touch it. And so moving forward, I would support Councillor Van Passen's motion that I've seconded. I do not feel right about borrowing from ourselves for this exact reason. Thank you.
What about this, Councillor Martin, and to the rest of council? One of the challenges I have is I would have rather present to the public last week that this is going to be a 9% tax increase than to basically come forward last week and suggest that we're making these cuts and this is the tax increase you're getting, and that was what was reported in the Simcoe Reformer. And now, here we are the next week and it goes from 4 to 9 or 3.7 to 9. So what about, again, I don't take this decision lightly either. In a non-COVID year, I wouldn't even hesitate to support your motion, Councillor Martin. I would not endorse this at all. But why not at least give, the people that are struggling in Simcoe, those on fixed income, seniors and so on, another option put forward is a chance to comment. So have a newspaper article that actually reports that, this could be a 9% tax increase, and see what the public feedback is from those that obviously, that likely don't watch council meetings and so on. So that's another option. I'm just throwing it out there that we defer it for one more week, this particular decision, and we allow it to be reported in the media, and then we come back again. Go ahead.
If I may comment on that. I didn't bring it up because the last time I did this, I think I received some flack. But I did a social media poll. I get it. Take it with a grain of salt. I know that it's not entirely relevant. I put it on my Instagram. I featured content about borrowing from the legacy fund, and I have shared it with a few council members. I was astounded. Without taking the time to pull it up here, I did save it. Small group, small study, but it was 70% asked or said to not pull on the legacy fund. I shared information about the other cuts in the budget, and the 12% and the 3%, the 9%, and then asked if the question was the same at the end, and I was still in the 70th percentile that said don't pull on the fund. So I do think that would be an interesting concept to reach out to the media and whatnot, but as I share that information with you, does it change anything for you? Does it make you go, oh, okay, perfect, I can trust that sample study? I don't know that it will. And if I'm being honest, while time doesn't feel such a bad thing to me, I genuinely think it's the principle of the issue for me. It's just going down that route of touching it, and I don't know if it's a lesser amount or half now and some later. I don't know that I can get behind the concept of it. So I don't want to say that more time is going to do it for me.
Well, time did change people's opinion for bylaw quite dramatically. So, it might change it for this. And I appreciate, I'm not really suggesting a Facebook or Twitter poll, but really just more about having a newspaper article that actually reaches all of those, is more likely to reach citizens in as an example, in the downtown core and Simcoe and so on. That's a more representative sample, I think. So if, Councillor Columbus, would you like to comment? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. The numbers that we were given for 2018 year, $2,703 tax bill, and 2021 would be $3,266, which is $562 and change more. Is that on a home valued at $240,000?
I believe so, but staff can comment. I'm certain it is.
Through the chair to the councillor. So when we're looking back at 2018, the median value home was $226,000 at that time. And now that's where we're at, the 240 value. So we were using the median from both those times.
Okay, thank you for that. So really, a lot of the homes now are worth $460,000, which is twice that. So their tax bill would actually be $6,500 a year, right? For some of those, particularly, I remember Councillor Wells used to get a lot of flack in Port Dover because the homes down there are so much more expensive than the rest of the county. So that would actually really put them probably $7,000 plus. That would be a concern, I think, to a lot of people down there.
Further comments? Councilor Martin, go ahead.
Sorry, you do have some other speakers waiting. I just wanted to comment on that directly. I guess the 20% inflation, that is good to know, but I just want to make sure that we put proper numbers and facts out. So that would be not including actual annual inflations, right? So we're not, I don't know what that would have been, but over people's incomes have increased slightly, not measurable to 20%, but we're probably not at 20% overall, maybe.
But also remember, based on when I think Catherine took that number, if you take that home that was back in 2018 at 227,000, it's also now 240,000.
Right.
Jason, go ahead.
Through the chair, no, if there is a deferral, staff could, the $240,000 number I know is causing some, some concern by council. It is the median number. There's nothing wrong with that. We can also do it differently. There's a number of different ways to do it. You can do it on the average, the mean average, not the median average. We can also do it based upon, a lot of the benchmarking studies do it based upon per $100,000 of assessed value. So we can provide some additional commentary to council, and it's something we'll make in our notes for next budget too, to provide those additional views of it.
Councilor Van Passen.
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. Just one thing, you keep talking about a 9% increase, but I thought staff suggested that without the borrowing, it would be 7.7% increase. And the discussion on the median value of the homes, remember we are on 2016 impact assessment year. It was due to get renewed in 2020. That was put off by the province because of COVID. So we're still acting on the values of 2016, and staff can correct me when I say this wrong, but if MPAC does a total reassessment of the county and everybody's value doubles, it doesn't change the amount of taxes they pay because we got to reduce our rate in half. We're not allowed to benefit by that increased assessment rating. So it's always a relative thing. And median is, there's as many houses above as there is below. And the mean is sort of what people consider a mathematical average. Is that, did I learn anything in grade 10 math class in high school?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's why I asked that question of Kathy earlier, because we always refer to the average, and I asked if it was the median, and she confirmed.
Yeah, so Councillor Van Passen is correct on a number of matters, and and just to correct, when I used the term 9%, it was just to go back to the original budget document that showed 12% increase and a 4% increase with 5% of that. So I just wanted to tie it back to the original one. Mean and median are both averages, and they're just, one is the middle number of, if you line them all up, and the one is the mathematical average. So they would present two different averages to you, and we could certainly, like I said, I think it's good to put those views into it. And that's why in many cases they also look at what does it mean to for each $100,000 worth of assessed value, then everyone at home can then go and calculate what that means to them personally. So we can present all that information to you. And Councillor Van Passen is correct that it doesn't really matter what the assessed value goes up. you take the same $112 million and you put it over the pool. So and that's why I continually focus back on what is the levy budget, because whether I take 112 million and spread that over a $2 billion worth of assessment, or take 112 million and spread that over $1 billion of assessment, you're still taking $112 million and spreading it over. It's all relative at that point in time. The one difference that will happen, though, is if there's differences in class shifts. So if there's a greater percentage of residential assessment versus commercial versus agricultural versus that, and there's, but that's a pretty minor difference at this point in time.
Further, Councilor Michelle, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to comment. This is obviously a very important thing, and I certainly take Councillor Martin's comments about the setting of a precedent. But I also have to say that I agree with your opinion that this is perhaps, of all the years, this is not the year to do this type of thing because of the impact it will have on people. And Councillor Columbus has referred to some of the examples of how hard it is for some people right now. I guess I'm just kind of going back to the whole idea of this, as Councillor Van Passen has described, of borrowing from ourselves, putting the expense that we currently have on another credit card. And I think what people need to see, because I do have to tell you, I would be a little bit reluctant to have the Simcoe Reformer report tomorrow, but now we're going to a 9% increase when we did have a fair bit of publicity about a 3.3% increase, and now they've changed their mind, and not only have they changed their mind, but to a significant degree. I think that maybe what people want to know, when you borrow money from yourself and you make promises about paying it back, you have to decide, I've got to have a plan for it, I'm going to remain disciplined, and I'm going to get that done over the period of time that I say I will. And I think that's the key to this, is letting people know we're serious about how we're doing it, and we're serious about getting it done. Thank you.
Further from councillors. Councillor Martin, go ahead. We have been limiting the discussion to 2 on a motion, but I think this is a pretty serious matter, so.
Thank you, Mayor Chop. I think Councillor Michelle's comments, I wanted to comment on them because it's one of my biggest concerns. We're going to make promises to get it done, and we're going to be serious about getting it done and serious about the repayment. And I know that each and every one of us are and is, but what happens when we're not here? What happens when the next council isn't as serious about what we've left for them? And we looked at changing the policy here to potentially withdraw from the principal on it, because that's not supposed to happen, and we're entitled to do that. And if that's what we decide to do, fine. But what happens when the next council decides to not repay or to further withdraw? So we're serious about it, and I get that, but I think it's just important to note that it's a gamble if we're going to assume that everyone's going to treat it as seriously as we would.
I see 2 other hands up, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Rabbits. Staff, do you have any comments on your thoughts in terms of deferring this to, sort of gauge some public opinion, some more appropriate public opinion given the reporting that's taken place to date?
I will comment quickly. I would say that anything that helps council make the decision, this is a large decision. And anything that provides more information to council is appropriate. A week's deferral is not going to create, especially if all we're deferring is one item, and we're not going to go back and revisit 20 other items. I would say that from staff's point of view, it would not hamper us, and if it helps council, we would be supportive of it.
Just to note as well that we'd also have to defer the last resolution as well, the adoption of the budget.
I think what I would like to do, though, is adopt the is there not a way, Andy or Jason, to, if that is the will of council, that we adopt the budget, because we're not going back on these other items and redoing a 5th day with 30 staff members on the line? I remember in our first year, in our original CAO had made the comments to the previous council about how much these budget meetings cost, and I remember Councillor Rabbits echoing those comments, and here we are on day 4. So I want to ensure that the budget is finalized, that the only option that's coming back before council is the decision on the use of the legacy fund.
I think the clerk can work out a way that we can, the only thing that we're investigating is the 5%. Staff won't take any other actions, and we can thin down the amount of staff that's required for the one item.
So, Andy, I'm not sure that we're going that direction yet. There is still a motion on the floor. If council does decide to do that, perhaps while I take the next two, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Rabbits, I see Councillor Michelle again, if you could prepare something just in case. Councillor Taylor?
My question was just going to be about the timing of this with getting that first tax bill out. I think Jason just answered it, that 1 more week is going to be okay. So I believe my question was answered, unless any other member of staff would like to make a comment on that.
Yeah, it may impact the first tax invoice, because we would then tax 50%. But I can confer with staff. But at the end of the day, we'd always prefer to get our tax bills out and do that as quickly as possible. But this is not a 1-year decision. This is a 3-year decision. So for the sake of one interim tax bill, I wouldn't want to push council into a decision they didn't feel comfortable with. That it's not, our friends to the west, they're just debating their water rate budget tonight. We're way ahead of them. So like I said, I'm not afraid of delaying one interim tax bill. This is a big issue for council.
Hey, Councillor Rabbits, I saw you were next. You're on mute there. Happens to the best of us sometimes.
Darn. I think I can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. I can't raise my hand and unmute my mic at the same time. I raised my hand to speak to the motion originally, but now it's sort of led to a question. I want to know if we're going to deal with this motion, or if we're going to be dealing with what I'm hearing from the table for a recommendation for deferral. So if I could just ask for a point of clarification as to where we're at, or what we're exactly discussing. It's hard to have two conversations at once. Are we discussing a deferral at this juncture, or are we going to deal with the motion that's been tabled?
No, there is a motion still that's been tabled. Nobody's moved for a deferral. It's just that it is an option that is there, either to overrule Councillor Van Passen's motion, or if it fails, then, that's also another option as opposed to adopting it. Councillor, all right, so much for our 2 times to a discussion, but Councillor Michelle, I see you're next, and then Councillor Columbus. This is a big item.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just maybe referring to Councillor Martin's comment, which I really take seriously, about burdening future councils with this legacy fund repayment, and I totally get that. I would hope that that the next council, will be asked that question at every door that they knock on during their campaign, and that's where they'll have to indicate their discipline and their commitment to making this right. So I'm not too concerned about, I am concerned about giving them this responsibility, but I also hope that when they're campaigning, they're going to be recognizing it, and that they will be addressing it with their constituents.
Councillor Columbus.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Could we hear the motion that's on the floor from the clerk, please?
The motion that's on the floor, moved by Councillor Van Passen, seconded by yourself, that council not accept the recommendation of staff to borrow $5 million from the legacy fund in 2021.
For clarity for Councillor Columbus, it was seconded by Councillor Martin.
Right, I was just thinking that. Yep, thanks.
Apologies.
All right. With no deferral motion tabled then, we can proceed. Councillor Columbus.
Yes, I think this is just too important a decision. We've worked 4 days on this. I think we've got to give it more time yet. Get staff to do some more number crunching and churning and see if I want to know what the exact numbers are that we're dealing with. I've heard 9%, 7.7%, 3.3%, and I think we should give it some time to get some more details and have a deferral to another couple weeks at least.
So the deferral would be just to defer, however, the legacy fund?
The deferral would be to, I'm in support of the staff's recommendation with respect to using the legacy fund strategy. So I just want to have more numbers in front of me, what the final numbers are before we vote on it.
Go ahead, Jason, if you had a comment.
Yeah, sorry, sorry for the confusion. So I was just trying to reconcile how we started this budget process off 4 days ago. It was a 4% tax increase with and borrowing 5% or $5 million from the legacy fund. With all the gives and takes over time, that 9% is now a 7.7%. And if Kathy Fanning could, or whoever had control of the screen with that summary, that up-to-date summary, if they could put it back up, we've shaved a few more percentage points off of where we started. So if we don't borrow from the legacy fund at all, it's, I believe if I remember what I saw, it's a 7.7%, an 8.8% budget increase and a 7.7% impact to the residential taxpayer.
Councillor Van Passen, does that address your question earlier with my comments?
Yes, it does, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. I was referring to the levy impact, not the impact to the residential homeowner. Councillor Columbus, you can continue.
Oh, I'm good, thanks.
Councillor Michelle, is your hand still up?
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, it's down yet.
Okay, Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Mayor Trump. I just wondered if anyone else could see the screen. I couldn't actually see anything. I could see the Catherine's initials, but I wasn't seeing any numbers, and I didn't the time prior.
I could see the screen here.
Catherine's screen got bigger for me, but I couldn't.
Ryan,
okay. I made notes of what Mr. Burgess said, as long as that's all I was seeing on this. You guys were seeing, that's fine.
So 8.8% is the number.
We're re-putting it up at the screen. Hopefully people can see it. So
it's still just your initials for me, but it's okay. I've heard it loud and clear. Thank you for trying.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just repeat
it.
Sorry, I was just going to repeat it for everyone. So if you remember, we started off with essentially a 9% budgetary levy increase. With all the puts and takes, we're now down to 8.8% increase, which means if we took a 5%, $5 million from the legacy fund, that would put it down to a 3.8% increase. And that's on the levy budget. If we translate that over to what it means to the residential taxpayer, it's about a 7.7% increase.
Do we know what the impact is on a commercial business owner for many of our businesses that have been impacted throughout all of this?
We could figure it out, but my guess is since the residential side is slightly below the 8.8, there's a bigger shift over to commercial. Commercial has a slightly bigger shift, so they would take a slightly bigger hit on the total increase.
I think that you know, if we do end up moving to hear this at a later date, I think that's critical for the reformer to include as well, given the number of our businesses that are impacted by this directly. Okay, if we could lower that so I can see everybody again. Thanks, Catherine. Okay, so if nobody's with Councillor Rabbits, Councillor Taylor. Oh boy.
Oh, sorry, through you. I was going to speak to the motion. I had some questions before. One time. I did want to speak against the motion. And I'll be honest with you, I'm really torn. The most persuasive argument that I have heard, respectfully, is just not right for this year. And I'm thinking about COVID-19. If we were in any other circumstance, there is no way that I could honestly be supporting this recommendation. I really have a lot of strong reservations as to us realizing the costs reductions year over year, $5 million. I think that's going to be a real challenge. And I'm fully anticipating us having a significant tax increase next year as a result of this decision, because I really don't believe we'll be able to make up these savings. I don't think this council has the will to make those service level reductions. It's going to be too painful. And I think we're going to realize the tax increase, it's going to be next year. But COVID is fresh. We haven't had our businesses have an opportunity even to file their taxes and realizes their losses. And I think that's going to be a real eye-opener once everyone has an opportunity to file their taxes for the last year and realize those losses. We're in worse shape than we thought we were. I want to say that's a statement across the board for different sectors and industries, and that's when people are really going to start to see businesses fold, is when we have our taxes come due this season for last year. So, you know, I think with that's why I'm voting against, or will be voting against the motion, is I don't think it's right for this year. But having said that, you know, I want to just maybe comment about where I'm at generationally. I'm a 30-something-year-old man growing up in this community, and I really feel like as a community leader, I've been given an empty bag. It's not a trust fund analogy that I'll be giving today. It's more of an analogy of feeling a bit sold out, to be frank with you. We've underfunded a lot of services. We've depleted our reserves. And we simply haven't planned sustainably for a future. And I find myself in a position where, am I going to do the same thing and sell out the next generation and the grandkids? Well, the kids have grown up. 30 years later, and I've been presented with a bill to pay. I feel like we need to pay that bill, but it simply isn't the year. It isn't the year for that. But bills are coming due, and I was raised to pay my bills and with interest to square things up and get back to zero. We need to get there as a community. But you've seen what's transpired with the level of service reductions to date. It's difficult. It's painful. And, you know, I'd rather pay now than pay later. But I guess what I'm saying is the pay now is going to be next year after we've had a year to live with COVID-19 and the ramifications from this deadly virus. Now simply isn't the year. If we were having this discussion without this pandemic, there's no way that I could support kicking the can down the road further. At least we're kicking it down a year or two, or to the next council. You know, I've assumed an office where folks have been kicking cans down the road for 30 odd years, and the bills are due, and someone's got to pay it. And I'm not willing to sell out future generations, and I'm talking 30, 50 years from now, to pay for decisions that we're making here today. We need to pay for those decisions. And with all due respect to those that are senior of my age bracket, my generation, you've passed off a lot of costs to young families growing up in our community, and we're realizing those costs today. We simply don't have the means to pay for all of these deferred costs. So I don't want to continue this trend of depleting reserves and now starting to treat our legacy fund in the same manner. You know, it's got to be abundantly clear. Staff have recommended that this is a one-time borrowing that we're going to be paying for